here at Nottingham Trent University, and it's my pleasure to chair this session. We have hopefully 5 papers, so we have very little time to waste. So we will be taking the papers in the order that you find them in the programme. Following all 5 papers, we will hopefully have sufficient time for a Q&A session, but this is dependent on people taking the 20 minutes and no more than the 20 minutes allotted. So I will try to give you notice when you have 3 minutes left and 1 minute left. And if you run over the 20 minutes, I've been asked to interrupt your paper so that we can move on to the next speaker. And I will apologize in advance if I have to do that. But given the fact that we have 5 papers, we have little or no choice. So I will introduce each speaker in turn, beginning with our first paper from Andrea Moneta. And can I also just apologize straight away for any mispronunciations of people's names? And please feel free to correct me. So Andrea Moneta is a transdisciplinary pracademic working both as an architect and a scenographer, and is currently senior lecturer for BA Theatre Design at Nottingham Trent University. He has a particular interest in exploring the intersection between scenography and architecture through a methodology that he called scene architecture, and is actively involved in researching and teaching in these areas. His professional work, teaching and research are strongly informed by his expertise in theatre design, architecture and the built environment. And Andrea's paper is entitled Architecture, Heritage and the Metaverse, New Approaches and Methods for the Digital Built Environment. Andrea, you have 20 minutes.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen immediately. That is this one. And I think it's there. And yes, so as you already said, the title, I'm going to quickly go into the subject because I have to show a lot of things, and some of them are quite complex. My suggestion is to go and read the paper that is published on the Traditional Dwellings and Settlements Review. So I'm going into the subject. We're going to talk about how to apply this methodology, architecture by elements, on the metaverse, that is a digital built environment on internet, and using history as a language, and trying to bring the sense of memory, a sense of place in a virtual world. This is the brief overview of my paper. I will talk about virtual worlds, of course, metaverse, but also the architectural theory that is applied to virtual worlds. Second Life, that is the platform where I designed architecture using this methodology. I will explore a little bit more about the methodology of architecture by elements, and then 2 case studies, Adrian Villa and Temple University, and conclusions. So first of all, my research questions. Why architecture in virtual worlds are mainly imitation of the real world? This is a very interesting aspect. If you look at gaming and virtual worlds, we have a kind of reproduction of what is already in the real world. And why architecture in virtual worlds are not designed by the architects? Because, as you know, mainly game designers are dealing with architecture. And can architectural theory help to design the virtual worlds? So using a specific architectural theory, can we improve the physical quality and experience of virtual world? And again, can the architecture by elements methodology be applied in this digital built environment, but producing architecture that are not copies, but are a critical interpretation of heritage or architecture? And can the metaverse be considered as an opportunity to transform how we design and experience architecture in the real world and the virtual world? So a lot of questions. And first of all, what is a metaverse? Metaverse, that means beyond universe, is basically a place, a virtual place where people can have a persistent, shared, immersive 3D experience that is on a parallel with the natural reality. This place that is growing and growing in the last years, and it's going to be bigger and bigger, is probably going to become the future of internet. And the metaverse is basically a space in which we have different virtual worlds. As you can see, there are several virtual worlds today. Each of these worlds are computer simulated environments and are populated by users that are using avatars. These avatars are, let's say, new the possibility to explore, to live, and to interact with this world in a virtual way. As I told you before, the real world is at the moment influencing the virtual world. So we have copies of our past. This is one of the most interesting aspects. Instead of doing new architectures, new worlds, we are basically copying what we already had in the past, in the present, and not in the future. Just to mention what happened when the past is designed into the virtual world. Sometimes, like in this way, this is the game Assassin's Creed 2, a reproduction of Florence in the Renaissance period is quite astonishing. But as you can see, the floor plan of Florence is completely changed because of the needs of the game. So again, what is interesting in the virtual world is the fact that virtual worlds are a place for experimentation in architecture. Since the 60s, when we have this incredible architecture by Archigram that were trying to think about a relationship between technology and architecture, they were predicting and envisioning a revolution that we can witness today. Since then, these virtual worlds were basically a place of experimentation, but also a place where architectural theory was used. Just to mention a couple of examples, Kevin Lynch and his studies about how people are using spaces was very important, was key to develop strategies and virtual worlds using his understanding of wayfinding and these elements of a city, as you can see here, path, node, landmark, edge, and district. And also Christopher Alexander was used in the virtual worlds. So his famous book, The Pattern Language, inspired The Sims, that is one of the best-selling video games of all the time. But who is definitely designing architecture? Unfortunately, we don't have architects designing architecture. And I'm saying unfortunately because what we can witness are copies of the existing architecture most of the time. And the roles of designers on virtual worlds are game designers, level designers, game artists, environment artists, but all these people are not trained as architects. They never had training, or they have a very little amount of knowledge about architecture, but this is, as you can imagine, a very important aspect to consider when dealing with the digital built environment. And let's go on the focus. Second Life is one of the virtual world, and I chose Second Life many years ago. I was experimenting on Second Life when I was trying to understand more about virtual worlds. Second Life is still relevant today. As you can see, there are 64 million residents and 42,000 residents online in July. And the Second Life is huge. If you can see, all these little dots are islands or piece of land that are 500 by 500 meters wide. And each of these pieces of land are built by users. So there are no game designers there, but each user can build his own place. And as you can see now, the quality can be really, really interesting and achieving very good, astonishing views. This is also a place of experimentation for architects. And as you can see here, some famous architects like the 10 Arquitectos are using Second Life as a place to test, develop new architecture. the methodology that I used, the methodology is architecture by elements that is inspired by my father's book, Logica e complessità dell'architettura. So this is a theory that has been applied in the real world and is based on the concept that derived by Wittgenstein philosophical concept of language to apply to architecture. So assuming that the language architecture is composed by different language games, and each of these language game has language parts and rules. So this methodology, architecture by elements, is one of these language games, and consider the architectural lexicon as a set of elements that can be associated or opposed in a number of linguistic constituents and organized into elementary form or complex sentences that are the new architectures. I know that it's quite complex. I'll try to summarize everything, but just to have an idea, what kind of forms and elements are we using? History guides the architectural design process with a selection of the reference language derived from the past. And the past is read as a process. So we can use known forms or new forms or archetypes of architecture. I just mentioned a couple of interesting archetypes of architecture, the Trilithon archetype of Stonehenge and the Maritime Theatre of the Hadrian's Villa. Of course, we are trying to not just use the forms, but also the principles that are attached to the forms. And as you can see, the lexicon and syntax that is chosen from the present and the past could be taken from the Roman Forum, as you can see. That is the, I would say, one of the best examples of architecture by elements. The Romans in the past already understood the incredible complexity of putting together different elements and working together to generate new forms that are combination of elements. But also recently, Louis Kahn was bringing back this approach. And as you can see in this example of the Dominican Mother House, using the same principle, the same way to assemble elements. And as you can see, they are definitely inspired by the Roman architecture and the Greek architecture. So in some way, using these elements and the combination of these elements and using history as a process, we're not just putting together pieces, but we are combining pieces into new forms. And this is generating new architectures. So in trying to summarize everything, I know it's quite complex, but if you think about language, a language system, the analogy with the language system, you can understand more how this principle of architecture by elements works. So we have our lovely architect sitting in front of the computer that is rooted in the cultural background and the context. That is the basic and most important aspect of design. So when choosing a language system, the architect is assuming meanings and selecting forms. To do so, and this is an interaction, of course, to do so, the architect is choosing a reference lexicon, and the reference lexicon is coming from the universal collective memory that is composed by primary lexical units and archetypes. With these elements and this lexicon, then we have the linguistic constituents, and we can go further on selecting criteria, the syntax. And at the end of this process, the new architecture will be in some way linked to the past, so to the heritage, to the memory, to the cultural background, the context, the site, the genius loci, but they are not a copy of the past. But because it's a new sentence, is a language made of past elements that is generating a new sentence. And this is why we call new architectures. Saying that, the case study that I want to propose were an experiment that with my 3 colleagues from Rome, Italy, we tried to apply this methodology, the architecture by elements methodology, sorry, to Second Life. Second Life, this place that is basically a place where users can generate and build without limitation. And we tried to do first a manifesto of the architecture by elements, building the Hadrian's Villa, not as a reproduction, but again, as a way to generate a new architecture. And then we also tested this with another work that was for the Temple University to build the campus online on Second Life. So the first example, Hadrian's Villa. As you know, the Hadrian's Villa is this famous, amazing building near Rome, and it's an incredible example of architecture by elements. As you can see, we selected a portion of the villa because of the limitation of space on Second Life, and we were using a piece of land that is called an island on Second Life, and trying to reproduce a kind of 1-to-1 scale, but cut out version of the villa, using of course, the Hadrian's Villa as the reference lexicon of the design. And we built a model, let's say. And as you can see, we were discussing design choices together, flying over the real architecture of the Hadrian's Villa, but using a scaled down model. And so why? I mean, we're trying to use history as a process to include time into the design. So basically, trying to bring time in a place, the virtual world of Second Life, that is without a history, without a time, because it's a brand new digital environment. And using memory to have the forms and the principles. And so, as you can see, columns and whatever, but also using history to transform the space in the very same moment we are building it. So it's not just a reproduction. Of course, we started to build up the Hadrian's Villa, but as a ruin. And this ruin was able to give spaces for new buildings. And the dichotomy between the old and the new is a non-duality relationship. That means that one is not pushing the other one, but is completely intervened. And as you can see, together with the Hadrian's Villa building, we built new buildings that are spaces for education, space for performance, and spaces for interaction with people. So as a teaching space, I had the chance to use this space for my students of scenography, and they were experimenting their set design using the Hadrian's Villa as a place of experimentation. And as you can see, we also built a series of buildings that were used for exhibition, performance, and this kind of dialogue between new and old was key to test the validity of this methodology. One of the interesting aspects was to deliver a performance, and we also had the chance to deliver a performance on Second Life and at the same time in the real world, in a theater, to test what is going on when we are putting together. We are going to use a short circuit between real and virtual world. So
Andrea, you have just under 3 minutes left.
All right, thank you. So we did a performance in the real world and in the same time in the virtual world, and the interaction was amazing. We had the chance to test these. The second example, and I'm closing, we did this for the Temple University, and again, we chose the grid of Philadelphia and a famous building of Louis Kahn, the National Parliament House in Dhaka, and combining the past with this place, we've been able to generate again a dialogue between old and new. And the buildings were, of course, inspired by the Dhaka, Louis Khan Dhaka's building as a ruin. And at the same time, we were able to realize a campus for the students. To conclude, we live in the post-digital era, where it's difficult to draw a line between digital and non-digital. Gaming in virtual worlds needs architects and architectural theory to go beyond the depiction of the real world. And considering the scale, architects should embrace this challenge, supporting the post-digital spatial revolution. But they don't have to forget that the role of memory, history, and architectural heritage is key. Again, this architecture by elements demonstrated that the role of memory and heritage is vital for the development of meaningful architecture that possess aesthetic and semantic values and are not just a copy of the previous architecture. And using this methodology, designer can freely choose from an endless source of forms and compositional principles from the past to deliver a new architecture that are incorporating time into the design process. And I hope that this was enough to give a hint of my paper. Again, my suggestion is to read the paper because it's a lot more complex. And as you can see, there are a lot of things involved. In a nutshell, I definitely can see that in the future, there is a lot of work for architects in the virtual environment, and we need to start to consider the virtual environment not just as a place for gaming, but also a place where more and more our life will be having exciting opportunities. And as you experienced last year and during this current year of the pandemic, this new normal can probably is going to incorporate the digital built environment more and more in the future. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for your attention, and goodbye.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you. Really good and right on time also. So before we move on to our second paper, we are just going to try Sura's microphone again, please.
Yes. Does it work now?
I can hear you a little bit. Can you turn your volume up a bit?
Okay, I'll just do it. Is it better for now?
I can at least hear something. Can anybody else hear anything?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, it's a bit faint though. You might want to get closer to the microphone.
Okay.
But yeah, we can at least hear you.
Okay, so we'll
from my side as well.
Yeah, we'll get straight on to the second paper then. So our second paper is from Dr. Jihan Salim, who is an architect and associate professor at the University of Leeds. She was fellow of the Senator George Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice from 2017 to 2018. She holds a PhD from the University of Sheffield and is leading the Architecture and Urbanism Research Group at the University of Leeds, covering interdisciplinary methods, bridging between architecture, urban politics, and sustainable heritage. Dr. Salim is leading several AHRC GCRF funded research projects in the Middle East, including in Egypt, Lebanon, but also in Northern Ireland. She is the author of Unfinished Places, Routledge 2017, and Architecture, Space and Memory, Routledge 2019. And her paper today is entitled Digitizing Heritage as an Integrated Sustainable Tool for Informative Interpretation, the case of Qais Jordan. 20 minutes, please.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. Is my presentation visible to everybody? Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, Chris, for the introduction, and thanks a lot for everybody attending the session today. It's a really delight to see the number of participants growing and growing. So good morning, everybody. And as Chris mentioned, my name is Jihan Salim, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Leeds. The presentation I'm having today is actually coming out of a funded projects by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So we are really a very large group of interdisciplinary researchers. So, and we only have some of the names here on the presentation. So the paper has been already published in the TDSR recent volume holding the same title and co-authored with Dr. Munder Jamhawi and Dr. Andrew Holland and Dr. Shoaib Nuh Ma'daba. So today, I'm just talking about the concept of heritage, which has developed over time, which on one hand is making the difference between tangible and intangible more and more blurred, but on the other hand as well, by highlighting the importance of the active role of people in the everyday built environments. So digital technologies have become increasingly important, specifically during the COVID time. First of all, because they are an integral part of everyday life of people. And second, because they offer new ways of viewing information. And I'm talking about here in particular, the different forms of mixed reality that allow the superimposition of information of different nature on architectural heritage without interfering in its materiality. And for architects, this understanding of materiality is very important. And this is by acting only on the visual side of things and the visual dimension. So in academic and practical terms, the use of digital technologies for us for heritage analysis, recording, reconstruction, and display and transmission to future generation is at the forefront of interdisciplinary innovation and interdisciplinary research. And it has proven to be a key assistant, particularly in contexts where heritage is particularly at risk of disappearing for many, many reasons, like destroyed or damaged by war, conflict, climate change, earthquakes, and more harmful events. In addition to that, the use of new media technology platforms and digital softwares and tools like digital modeling, immersive and augmented reality, creating virtual exhibitions and site tours and so on, can provide cultural institutions and museums and other stakeholders with digital alternatives to physical heritage preservation and enjoyment. And this is basically increasing also the heritage awareness and accessibility to many inaccessible sites and places. So basically for the presentation today and devoting from more of these concepts. So our talk today presents a reflection on the concept of digital heritage as a distinct research discourse. And for example, through a theoretical approach that finds in the use of digital technologies a necessary condition, but also rises from new opportunities for heritage interpretation and presentation, where people and artifacts interact, and in particular through using smart devices. So according to this context, the concept of historical culture and aesthetics value take a central role on the digital that allows the rise of an ecosystem where people can play a central role in defining these values. And to apply the idea of digitization to architectural and urban heritage, it's also necessary to root discourses in their own tangible and intangible characteristics. So different forms of other kinds of cultural heritage and built heritage, such as the archaeological heritage, for example, is one of our major issues. So in the coming 15 or 16 minutes, I will present insights on these issues derived from, as I mentioned, a project funded by the United Kingdom's Arts and Humanities Research Council titled The Living Museum of Qais, where we were looking at a tentative World Heritage Site of the Qais in North Jordan. The project is led by the University of Leeds and in partnership with Nottingham Trent University and the Jordan University of Science and Technology in Jordan, which started in 2019, and the project is still ongoing, so we haven't concluded that yet. In this work, we sought to explore how digital interfaces and multimedia platforms are used to transform perceptions of the local community of Qais in Jordan into a more active agent in the construction of collective memory. We also sought to examine the use of digital heritage tools to reconnect the local community to larger heritage values present on the site at the moment. Our central argument in that is that digital technologies hold the potential to alter the production of cultural heritage and cultural memory at the same time. So, for example, how is it now possible for the public to actively produce material for heritage collections through digital platforms? But in such a digital landscape, it's also important and essential to understand how multimedia, participatory media, can be altering the construction of collective memory. We also aim to understand how participation in the co-creation of digital content and social documentation are changing practices of collective remembrance. There is also, so we had really two main questions involved in this work. First of all is how digital platforms are reshaping cultural heritage and its use. And the second is what implications do such platforms and practices have on memory construction in the digital landscape. So just a very brief background about the site, the World Heritage Site in Jordan, which is the focus of our work. So the Jordanian village of Qais is located 120 kilometers north of Amman in Jordan, and its proximity to the Yarmouk River granted the site a unique significance among other Roman Decapolis cities in the Eastern Mediterranean region. The early account of the city of Qais refers to the settlement as the name Mekis, which is the name that locals still use until today. Qais and the remains of the ancient city of Gadara were registered on the UNESCO World Heritage Tentative List in 2001, and for years the site was also a key destination for both domestic and international tourists, which added significantly to the local economy of the community and the local community living there. However, the recent conflict in Syria led to a severe destruction and reduction in tourism, which continues to limit the site's socioeconomic potential until today. Another impact on the site was the efforts to protect the ancient remains and the archaeological artifacts of the site. So the Jordanian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquity relocated much of the local community from its historic Ottoman era village during the 1980s. In addition, the village-built fabric of the Ottoman era houses and shops suffered from neglect, physical deterioration, and lack of proper conservation at the moment. This in turn compromised its historic spatial integrity and resulted in a loss of much of its cultural value. Although the ministry's well-intentioned act, the relocation broke the local community connection to traditional practices of architecture, economy, and urban space, and there has been a loss of appreciation and awareness of the site's importance within the local community, and more recently, a sharp decline in the local tourist economy. As a result, the site is now at risk of physical deterioration, and it's becoming increasingly likely that the local knowledge and expertise in heritage protection will also be lost. So 30 years on since the relocation of the community displacement, many of the community, as we mentioned, their cultural practices, traditions, and rituals are also gradually disappearing. An entire generation, and I'm talking basically about those who are 30 years old at the moment, has grown up without ever having lived there and only know of life of the old village through their parents' storytelling. The reproduction of cultural habits and practices related to the site has ceased, and large parts of this culture and history is becoming increasingly remote, drifting ever further from the active culture and social memory of the people. So we worked closely with members of the local families who have once lived in the village or who have inherited casual and traditional accounts of life there from older siblings. These allowed us to weave narratives that created a generic picture of economical, social, administrative, and ideological realities in Qais. This understanding also helped explain aspects of the village tangible and intangible heritage and the ways its residents lived in and around Gadara's ancient architectural remains. We then designed a methodology that allowed digitizing these stories and memories to create a detailed record of the relationship between the archaeological and sociocultural aspect of Qais, and so reflect the site's interconnections of its layers of its history. Our work also involved two investigations. First, we aimed to revitalize the community's sense of place and interest in their heritage, and in doing so, to support sustainable heritage approaches that benefit the local economy and ensure the protection of all aspects of the site's past. We also aim to reconstruct a sense of the everyday cultural heritage that once linked the local community to its places. And we have been bringing local community members to their houses, for example, at Haritat Foka, a very famous and familiar living space in Qais, and interviewing them on site. This has been a great assistance in terms of connecting historical, social, and cultural aspects of their memories and to the realities of the place and its history. So through digital storytelling, the community reflected on their individual interpretations and memories of their living spaces, traditions, and everyday practices. And as such, we understand authenticity as an embodied experience and emotional attachment to a place derived from the everyday practices, their everyday activities, and specifically looking at the younger generation. Stories of the community were, for example, recorded and digitized using QR codes, which could be scanned. This is one of them, which could be scanned to the viewers to have them and take them linked to the community stories and narratives. In addition, we also use surveys of research data and archaeological evidence. Let me display this for a minute. We generated scanned models of the site to produce a credible layout of historical Gadara spatial structures, buildings, layouts, and infrastructure, including overlaying archaeological and spatial data and imaging of the site of a custom-designed ArcGIS software to demonstrate chronological transformation of the Ottoman village. The primary method of recording in the site in 3D was through laser scanning, and executed the technical teams from 2 local partners in Jordan during 2019 and the early 2020. So at some point we had to do the majority of the scanning during the pandemic, which is a big hurdle for us. In the UK, we generated point clouds, which were then converted to 3D meshed models by first calculating point normals on the point clouds and then applying a potent surface reconstruction. The meshed models were then reduced in data size to useful level before being UV mapped and textured. This is just a quick fly through some of the point cloud we created, but it's still a work in process. We also developed integrated virtual environments that incorporated research, archived and surveyed data to offer 3D interactive virtual environments supported by infographics and digitized archaeological database in the form of sustainable conservation of the site, and to make the scientific and the archaeological data more accessible to public and non-specialized users. To integrate 2 of the digital domains, and I'm talking here about how do we merge between the digital and the heritage and the tradition, we delivered capacity building and training workshops on data gathering techniques targeted at the local community and specifically targeting the young people living in Qais. The training workshops and data gathering techniques targeted the local community, heritage professionals, and local young people, and this included training them in how to run spatial surveys, record spatial and cultural narratives and oral histories, and use analytical processes to untangle complicated history. And this work also heavily relied on the production of online content that helped us to develop a website that now hosts the digital archive of Qais, including interactive VR environments, 360 visualizations, drone imaging, interviews, and short films, and developing digital story maps and more of this production. We also have created a network of local community volunteers who are further enhancing the digital platform with the collection of interviews and resources around the intangible heritage of Qais. And we're basically trying and ensuring that the lived experience and daily cultural practice of the community that built and lived in Qais for a long time are protected and maintained for the future. Overall, our methodology was implemented to enable the community to go beyond the collective memory and become more analytical of the basis for identities that already they hold. The project activities and outputs had several positive aspects so far, to report on 3 of those. They first captured the community's interest and imagination and allowed visualizing narratives of buildings or sites using new medias for the first time. Second, they enabled moving the visual representation of historical sites to seek sources of evidence that allowed them to make conclusions of the basis of evidence, making their own judgments and build their own conclusions, and also realize which inquiry process or historical concept they are working on. And third, the community also learned from non-symbolic first group experience and were encouraged and required to collaborate and provide social atmospheres. So through each activity we implemented with the community in Qais across the past 3 years, each activity have a specific content knowledge, which with the focus that can communicate the diverse historical influences of modern society. The focus was not only on simply reading factual information, but it's about history and culture, and also to look and to move from place to another and to question preconceptions and the local community to construct their own understanding and opinions from the evidence of different influences. So to conclude in this work, we try to learn and understand the history of the site through the heritage and of its occupants, and following traces of the families, individuals, and community relations in the site and their homes and archaeology, and how that links through historical narratives and historical layers. This was a journey of discovery that not only revealed connections between the different households to each other, but the cultural practices and tradition. But more critically as well, it revealed how the local culture, rituals, and the social spatial patterns are stemmed from the unique nature of the site. And in the absence of such documentation and recording, the knowledge and the local accounts and understanding of Qais history and cultural heritage, which will remain disconnected and fragmented. So there's many of work that we have done in the past 3 years, and it's really difficult to put everything in 20 minutes here, but I would like to invite everyone that if you need to know more about the work we have done and the outputs that we have created, you can visit the website here at www.qaisheritage.com. So there you will learn about the history from interactive Esri GIS maps. You can have virtual tours of the site. You can have a virtual tour of the Museum of Qais, which holds a lot of the artifacts, and working closely with our partners in Jordan, and specifically at Just University, Jordan's University for Science and Technology, and the Department of Antiquities as well, which have been really great support for us. So I would just advise everybody, go and look and have a look at the website and navigate all the outputs and the interactive material we have posted there. It's still, as I mentioned, work in progress, but you will find a lot of material available there. Also, I would like to invite you to look at our Facebook page and Twitter account as well to look at more and more updates. We were unfortunate to have our first dissemination exhibition on site in Qais in the past 2 weeks, and it just closed on Sunday, the 28th of August. It was run for 2 weeks, and we have successfully displayed and disseminated a lot of the co-production work that we have worked with the community, and I'm talking about all the digital outputs we have created. We were able also to disseminate and experiment our first virtual reality, interactive virtual reality model for the site of Qais, looking here in the back here. So it was tested and it worked really successfully. This is where you can start to go closer to some hotspots and know more information about the site. As I mentioned, those are the amazing people of Qais who worked with us and gave them their original and authentic stories. So you just go and click, use your phone, your smartphone, just go and click on the QR code, and it will take you to listen and hear a lot of digital storytelling and stories about the site. And so very soon, if you go on the website, hopefully next week, we will be uploading our virtual exhibition on the website, and you will be able to navigate it yourself there. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jihan. That's excellent. Really, really interesting, fascinating project, and hugely impressive body of work, I suppose. So yes, hopefully there will be plenty of questions. So if anybody has any questions, please save your questions up for the Q&A session, or if you prefer, you can put your question into the chat bar. We will move straight on to our third paper. So our third paper is from Dr. Pingsheng Wu, who's Professor of Architectural History, the Department of Architecture at National Cheng Kung University in Taiwan. He has published a paper in the Journal of Architecture with Dr. An Yu Chang entitled Visualizing the Subsistence Productions of Ordinary People in a Modernized Colonial City, the Socio-Economic Spatial Dimension of Tianjin City, 1934. In 2018, and translated James Semple Kerr's Conversation Plan, 7th edition, into Chinese in 2017. And today's paper is entitled Visualizing the Unseen Rice Street in Colonial Taiwan, an application of geographic information systems and interpretations of everydayness. You have 20 minutes. Thank you. Off you go.
Okay, sorry.
You can begin.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, I'm Pingsheng Wu from National Cheng Kung University of Taiwan. It's my great pleasure to join this online conference. Today, I'm going to present a paper co-authored with Dr. An Yu Chang, which is entitled Visualizing the Unseen Rice Street in Colonial Taiwan, an application of geographic information system and interpretation of everydayness. The land colonialism mate, Arif Derlik, once described Taiwan in his lecture, Qing Dynasty, Empire of Japan, Republic of China, these three political regimes govern Taiwan in a row. Even today, Taiwan is under sort of multiple colonized circumstances if the sense of nation building of the post-colonialism is viewed. In this paper, a historical research and survey on contemporary subsistence production are viewed as two parts of an action to overcome the colonized circumstances. So we like to deal with two issues in this research. First is an visible but colonially unseen spatial layer of Tainan. The second is to bridge the gap between histories and everyday life of a once colonized society and city. GIS is applied in different way, in both parts. Further, we propose an initial conceptual perspective from everydayness to bridge these two parts with the inherent connection in everyday and daily life. Briefly speaking, there are three contexts when the application of GIS are concerned. First is a long-term political context that under the governance of Republic of China, the 39-year-long martial law period was put into an end in 1987. That led to an empirical turn on the historical discourse of Japanese colonial period. The second context is the empirical turn of historical researches. In the 1990s, in the aftermath of martial law period, the empirical turn unveiled the scientific, reasonable, bureaucratic, technical dimensions of Japanese colonial period by the open and release of historical materials and facts. As for the researching method about building as a substantial historical material, it leads architectural historians to make use of the maps, aerial photographs, which were rapidly released by government since the spatial information within them are collaborated by GIS. This is the last context, the open source of image material. For example, in 2003, Academia Sinica of Taiwan officially provided the service of Taiwan history and culture in time and space system. So in addition, we would like to have a brief introduction on urban history of Tainan City, and then goes to the application of GIS. So as you can see on the screen, this is the downtown of Tainan City today. The location of the gates and the wall built in the Qing Dynasty, some parts of them are still remained. You could see the red dot lines on the screen. They were once the city walls during the Qing Dynasty. The street developed in Qing Dynasty forms the first social spatial layer of Tainan City. At that time called Taiwan or Taiwan Fu at that time. There were more than 100 streets just before the Japanese colonial period. As you can see, this is the main street curved due to the terrain. And the green area we call the downtown area for local trade, and the blue one's a canal area for the overseas trade. They have been once the most prosperous area of the city at that time. Japanese colonial government set up modern institutional and mechanical governing system, and new administrative area called Tainan was established. In Japanese period, the most important spatial transformation were the urban plans. The 1911 plan mainly covered the scope of the walled settlement. The 1929 plan area expanded and came up with the implanted modern institution and buildings. And this is the second social spatial layer of Tainan. In this period, many records and documents were made under the frame of new administrative area instead of the Han traditional way. In the 1930s, a new political economic axis, Tashio-cho Street and Suehiro-cho Street was established and promoted. As you can see on the screen, the the red line shows that. With this new context, we could see many new avenues, roads, and also lots of public buildings established during that time. For example, we could see the parade on the Suahilo Cho Street, and also you can see on the screen the iconic Ali tree on Taisho Cho Street. Also, we have a new Anping Canal, and also the city wall in the center of the city, just near by the new roundabout, and also the railway station. And we could see, still have Westgate Public Market, and also the department store, and also the banking. So it's kind of a new modern city at that time. And this is the governor, Japanese governor, Kodama Gendaro. This statue, his statue, just the center, is located in the center of the roundabout. It's kind of a symbol of colonial governance. So the history just mentioned is primarily the nation-state's historical narrative. However, the citizens are invisible in it. A step further, we visualize the economic activities of the commoner by GIS. In the beginning, when choropleth map is applied to figure out the commoner's economic performance, the modifiable aerial unit problem follows up immediately. So with this, a colonially unseen street life is visualized to counter the big history. Tainan is settled by migrant Han people no later than early 17th century. Therefore, before there was a boundary of administrative division set by any regime or political entity, there was already a real Tainan settlement where people lived their life, however neglected by the eye of colonial empire, even in the very practical perspective. On the one hand, many photos taken in Japanese period are about the new access, the open of Qing period street to show the modernized street views and buildings. On the other hand, view scenery of traditional life was represented. So the data of economic activities in Tainan City is visualized as heat map. It is significant to see that nearly 40 years after the Empire of Japan took over Taiwan, 25 years after the first spatial plan of Tainan was proposed, and 10 years after the new access, Suahilo Cho Street was opened. The original structure still generally unchanged. Main streets were still the central business district of this settlement. The colonial governance and the modern plan shaped new built environment, but the transformation of socio-economic environment colonially belated. So further, the distribution map reveals a lived street. Rice Street was where the factories of rice producing and selling gathered. This street was first recorded in 1807. However, the records of the crops trading of this location could be traced back to 1696. This important street, however, became anomalous on the Japanese colony and its special plans. When Tainan City was set up, Rice Street became the boundary of 4 divisions. Like mentioned before, and the subsequence was that when all kinds of documents recorded under the framework of Machicho, such as the material guide of commerce and industry of Tainan City, the vivid street life was separately classified into these 4 divisions. The format colonized used to record to see the colonized, attributed to the result that some phenomena of historical facts invisible. In fact, the vivid life never vanished. In Rice Street in 1934, there were all sorts of economic activities for daily life. There was only one rice factory shop, but several shops of ritual money and incense still supplied the temples nearby. There were lots of simple food processing factories, including noodle, soybean sauce, and grain flour, Chinese pharmacies, wooden furniture stores, cotton cloth stores, and pottery stores. Besides, there were some modern industries like metalwork and delicate productions with noble metal. Some modern service industry like clinic, restaurant, pawn shop, and pool room was as well. For an once colonized society with introduced modernity, it is not surprising that there is a rupture between histories and everyday life. The absence of marginal histories of ordinary people leads to the rupture between history and present, between academic research and our own daily life experience as well. Therefore, a theoretical perspective to face the historic facts and present scene of a settlements shall be proposed to bridge the ruptures. Here we would spare the details of theoretical discourses and left them to written paper. Briefly speaking, when we throw the light on the concept everydayness, not only the dimensions of routinized life is focused, but also the dimension that in an Orient colonized society, everyday life is a modernized temporal form, different from traditional life. For example, in Rice Street, by acknowledging the various economic activities, including traditional and modern, industry and service, when we turn to focus on the subsistence productions of ordinary people in daily life, instead of paying attention on the modernization narrative. There we see the potentiality of the colonized daily life when transformation was faced. The Rice Street here is described as an in-between space for 3 levels. First, it was a real-lived place, but became a non-place under colonial administration. It was just a boundary waiting to be opened. Second, the street life illuminates a sense of settlement that changed and unchanged coexist. A society driven by ever new in the ever same. Finally, in between space conceptually implies the possibility of the commoners when they are the next generation face the macro transformation in a very micro but practical scale and scope. In recent years, cultural heritage of Tainan City became a kind of niche of conservation and economically reuse. Further, there are a deeper impact on the dimension of self-identity. The national policies focus on cultural heritage contribute to the recognition of the complex of Taiwanese histories. However, to some extent, it could be a kind of conception when histories are just used to add the exotic stories to the old house for some business interests or hipster sense. Okay. So based on attention paid to the subsistence production of ordinary people and the societal continuity within it, we operate a survey project in the non-government organization, the Foundation of Historic City Conservation and Regeneration, and to view our own visible but unseen everyday life. In cultural and practice of the Ordinary Everyday Life project, The target investigation were the economic activities related to paddy and rice, like rice shops, snack shops, etc. GIS is applied as an efficient, accessible, and most important, as easy tool for volunteers to empower themselves. About 21 volunteers were trained. In this survey, they took pictures, filled investigation notes, and established the GIS files. Based on GIS, a basic general and comprehensive figure of the paddy and rice-related economic activities is presented. Moreover, the effort volunteers pay the survey return to themselves since the project is very close to their own life. In the following topic, we choose the medicine pharmacy in 2018, the clothing in 2019. Some volunteers joined the project because the industries we choose are highly related to their own profession or family background. To some extent, we could claim that the whole project is quite self-reflective for everyone involved.
You have 3 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. The entire practice just began when we survey is done. GIS presents the social facts. However, further promotion like tour guide, public education, publishing are necessary to represent the reality of everyday life of the city, to bridge the history and contemporary situation by linking within subsistence production. So I will come to the conclusion. In historical researches, GIS is very efficient to visualize historical facts and provides a relatively general and comprehensive view that allow researchers pay more attention to the marginal histories of their commoners' everyday life. In the survey project, GIS is an easy tool for the volunteers, and the data collected is accumulated to that so that the survey would not be isolated and easily to continue or reboot in any time for any other purpose. Even interfacing with the official data, they are the GIS format projects. Last but not the least important, the empirical, historical, or contemporary social facts are just the basic understanding for further narrative and actions. To make better use of GIS may be a deeper reflection on the initial reason we choose this tool and the visionary applications GIS could help is desirable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating stuff, and within the time once again. So we are on schedule, which is great. So before we move on to our fourth paper, I think that Surah would like to try her microphone again.
Yeah.
Surah, yeah.
Okay. Any good news?
That's much better.
Is it
Perfect.
okay?
That's
Much
perfect.
better? Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you so
perfect.
much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to our fourth paper of 5. So our fourth paper is from Dr. Cecilia Chu, who is a faculty member in the Division of Landscape Architecture at the University of Hong Kong. She is the author of Colonial Urban Development in Hong Kong, Speculative Housing and Segregation in the City. So this was published by Routledge in 2020 and is co-editor of The Speculative City, Emergent Forms and Norms of the Built Environment from the University of Toronto Press, also in 2020. She is an editorial board member of the Journal of Urban History, Traditional Dwellings and Settlements Review, and the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Hong Kong. And today's paper is entitled Cultural Relics, Place Meanings and the Archaeological Imagination. Cecilia, over to you. 20 minutes, please.
Oops, this is not really how I started. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As I mentioned in an earlier message to the chair, that my paper actually does not deal so much with the topic of digital tools. It was a late addition as a result of reshuffling of the panels, but nevertheless, I hope that some of the issues that the paper raises, especially concerning heritage interpretation, could be linked to the other parts, the other papers in the discussion. In this paper, I explore how unearthed relics, unearthed architectural remains from different periods in the past have been transformed from unfamiliar objects to effective mediums for retelling the histories of a city. And in particular, I focus on a series of recently discovered building remnants in urban Hong Kong. These materials, which date from the Song dynasty to the early British colonial period, have captured significant public attentions and fed into a fast-growing conservation movement, whereas Hong Kong citizens have become increasingly engaged to preserving the city's built heritage and urban identity. So in the following, I will consider some of the unearthed materials and their potential in retelling stories about Hong Kong's past. And more specifically, I will look at two examples. The first is a set of ancient household wells dating from the Song and Yuan dynasty in Kowloon. And the second is a number of foundation stones of colonial era shop houses that were owned by a wealthy but socially marginalized Tanka woman in the central business district. And finally, I'll briefly touch on a recently discovered underground reservoir structure that was originally slated for demolition, but was saved due to a public campaign for its conservation. Now, when compared with heritage buildings that are familiar to us, the meanings of these underground relics tend to be more ambiguous. Although people first came to know them through documentation by professional experts, they tended to go on and reinterpret them on their own terms, often through re-articulating their images on various media, including various forms of digital media, and in the process created new effective relationships with these remnants. So some questions I'd like to consider here include the following. How do unearthed relics, particularly those discovered by accidents, acquire their historicity after their initial discoveries? How are these relics, how are these relics different from those that are more familiar and widely known? How have these materials been used as sources to narrate stories about the past? And how have these stories in turn produced new historical and cultural knowledge and fostered new spatial relations to localities and territories? Although the histories of Hong Kong often is assumed to begin with the British occupation in the mid-19th century, its territory is ridden with cultural relics that dated back thousands of years. Until recently, these unearthed relics, materials, have been placed typically in museums as isolated objects, attracting little interest from the public. But such an attitude has begun to change with several new archaeological discoveries in recent years. One of these is the finding of a set of ancient household wells and other relics in East Kowloon, in an area called Sacred Hill, or Song Wong Toi, which was so named to commemorate the last emperor of the Song dynasty, who traveled here 800 years ago to escape the Mongol invasion in the north. The relics were discovered in 2008 during the construction of a new mass transit railway system. And over the next few years, extensive findings, including wells, building remains, footpaths, stone structures, and ceramic shards from different periods were unearthed. These information were given in several detailed government reports, but they're by nature documentary and rather dry. And the general public tended to reinterpret them based on information obtained from sort of general news. One relics that captured the most attention was a Song dynasty square well that was confirmed by archaeologists to be of high preservation value. And the image of the well shown here quickly became a sensation across Hong Kong, prompting new calls for the government and the mass transit railway to preserve the well on site because it is an important part of Hong Kong's history. Now, despite the great enthusiasms around the well, the significance ascribed to it was not the same between the different groups of people. Pro-Beijing commentators, for example, argue that the well and other related unearthed relics and Sacred Hill highlights Hong Kong's tie to mainland China before colonial time and was even part of the Maritime Silk Road. Other local conservation groups, Many consist of young people, including students, teachers, and professionals, saw the relics as the material evidence of Hong Kong's unique territorial identity that has always been separate from China. That is, even in the Song period, the emperor chose to escape here because it was a different place from the mainland. These concerned groups made good use of the social media to call for the relics' conservation. So this slide shows the Facebook pages of two groups, Sacred Hill Savers and Defenders of Song Dynasty Relics. The groups used the case to criticize the government for its long-standing neglect of protecting Hong Kong's heritage, and even held a sit-in in the Antiquities and Monuments Office, asking the construction to stop immediately. At the end, the railway company agreed to consider its plan for the stations to accommodate the relics. Even this would increase the cost, arguably a political move to quell growing discontent amongst the population. And it should be noted here that this incident occurred just 2 months before the beginning of Hong Kong's very famous Occupy movement on 2015, of which many group members of the Sacred Hill Savers, they also joined. Here's another image of this news headline concerning the relics and their preservation. And I'd like to just point out an interesting headline at the bottom right here, which says plans to preserve relics found at MTR building site to go too far, cost too much, which was a statement actually made by local archaeologists who thought that the relics represented only common settlements aside from the well. They don't have very high preservation values aside that and aside the well. So it could not be justified the enormous cost needed to preserve these relics on situ. Now, almost 5 years into the controversy, the new MTR line was finally opened in June 2021, which is very recent. Shown here is an exhibition of the Song Wong Toi station called Treasures from Sacred Hill, which displayed numerous relics excavated during the station's constructions. The show was apparently a very well-attended event, and which was a departure from similar exhibits in the past. The famous Song Dynasty well was at this point not yet available for view, but the plan was to create a space dedicated for public viewing on its original location, which was shown in the rendering on the right. The case of the Sacred Hill relics certainly raises questions on the political uses of heritage and their representations, but it also points to what has been referred to as the agency of things, where unearthed material objects and their sites may generate new affective relationship with place and senses of historicity, which may not be achieved, say, by seeing them in a museum located away from the sites of discovery. So I guess this question is about how these sites are being presented and disseminated publicly is an interesting question. Now, these relics can also be seen in my second case, which concerns with a set of building remains of 19th century tenement houses in central Hong Kong. These remains were accidentally discovered in an urban renewal project in 2014. The buildings that used to stand here were demolished in the 1960s, but these features were not removed. As in the last case, community-based research and activism played a key role in engaging the public in knowing the relics and seeing potential in them through various kinds of media. The site is between Cochrane Street and Guzlov Street, an area used to be called the Middle Bazaar, in a zone that was in between the European and Chinese community district, Chinese districts. It was also the site of the current central to mid-level escalator. The buildings were unique because they were built prior to the bubonic plague outbreak in 1894 and are the only remaining remnants of back-to-back tenements in the city. Research by conservation activists revealed that these buildings were connected to some important historical figures. One of these is this woman shown on the right here. Ma Giu actually is not her. It's just a similar Tanka woman that looks like that people imagine would be her. This woman used to own many properties in Cochrane Street. In the 1850s, Agiu entered into a relationship with, as a protected woman with an American opium trader who bought her several tenement properties, which she used to make further investments after her lover left Hong Kong. But she remained on the margins of both the European and Chinese community until her death. And here's another painting of an imagined Tanka woman from the 19th century that get disseminated widely through the media, attracting a lot of discussions about the Agiu story, but also about the conservation of the site. The activists argue that this history, along with that of the site of the tenements, can tell us more about the interplay between the East and West and Hong Kong's early social development, including race, class, and gender relationships, and the transfer of property ownerships from Europeans to Chinese. The government recognized the historical origins of the building remains, as the activists were pushing the government to save these remains and graded them. But the social history of the site was not really recognized. Archaeological experts were also in the opinions that these foundation stones did not warrant the status of monuments. To push for their cause, the conservation activists led by the Central and Western Concern Group shared their research on social media. They also organized guided tours, bringing people to the sites to examine the foundation stone structures, using them not only to retell the stories of Agiu, but also to discuss traditional building construction techniques and material conservation. And meanwhile, they also created a drama that reenacted the story of Agiu, getting the local legislator, Tanya Chan, to play Agiu's role on site to attract media attention. Through these multiple efforts, the concerned group managed to raise much public interest in protecting the stones and use them to highlight Hong Kong as a unique historical cultural place, even though in fact the stones were ruled out by the archaeologists who assigned them just a very low heritage value. And ultimately, the Urban Renewal Authority was convinced to conserve and incorporate these materials in their proposed development. Here is another renderings envisioning the future of the site. Like the proposal for the Song Dynasty well of Sacred Hill, the idea was to generate new appreciation of the site's history and to allow visitors to imagine Hong Kong's past or multiple pasts of the different kinds of relationships associated with the site. The widespread interest on the Agiu story also led to other creative undertakings on protecting Hong Kong's heritage. Shown here are 2 pages of a comic that tells the story of a group of young people passionately fighting to protect Hong Kong's heritage and preserving its urban identity. Note the image of the Song Dynasty well at the bottom of the left image, where the words above it said, "You can forget who we are, but we will never forget who we are." So this also brings up the politics of identity in Hong Kong in the past 20 years and why suddenly a Song Dynasty well become claimed by some of the young people as a unique identity for Hong Kong, as a very important evidence. Other examples include a TV show shown on the left, which features the former Treasury Secretary John Tsang talking about the significance of the Cochrane Street building remains and making a statement about the material conservation. On the right was an enactment exercise in a university undergraduate history course where students role-play the characters of Agiu, where they also crafted other historical figure around her life. And I was actually involved in teaching this course myself. Finally, I will end with another image of a recent case concerning the conservation of a century-old storage reservoir in Bishop's Hills, Kowloon, which was accidentally discovered during a development project. The discovery of the underground infrastructure, which consists of 100 stone columns and Roman-style brick arches, set off a buzz in the social media that quickly forced the government to halt the work and to promise to preserve the site. It also prompted many members of the general public to try entering the site to admire the unique structure in the following days. Most importantly, it became an immediate catalyst for local conservation enthusiasts to get on with researching Hong Kong's waterworks, linking the site with its remnants to a global history of infrastructure, and in record time compiled a large number of research materials to support the site's conservation. So here on the right is a conceptual design on the future use of the site as a public park. There are many actually architectural students suddenly becoming very interested to use the site as their projects. And it's amazing how in such a short time, images of these arches were disseminated everywhere in Hong Kong. And of course, there were also many reconstructed drawings being produced to re-envision their grandeur, such as this one here, that also added to the significance of the site and also incited political debates about Hong Kong's past. I'll end here by returning to the questions raised in the beginning of the presentations, in particular asking how unearthed relics acquired their historicity after the initial discoveries. How have the materials been used to construct different stories of the past? How the stories in turn have produced new historical and cultural knowledge and foster new spatial relations to localities and territories. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. And again, I'm sure we will have plenty of questions in the Q&A. So please save your questions up for Cecilia, and we will move straight into our final paper with a microphone that works really well. So the final paper is from Surah Al-Sabah, who is an architect and professional engineer based in Kuwait. She established her own company, Home Genius, in 2004, and Home Genius Juniors, where she educates young aspiring architects. Her latest publication is entitled A Future Vision for the Multi-Use House in Kuwait Between Acceptance and Rejection, published in the Traditional Dwellings and Settlements Review in 2017. And today's paper is entitled The Importance of Digital Technology for the Growth of Multi-Use House Typology in Kuwait. Surah, off you go. I can see your screen, but I can't. You're muted.
Oh, okay.
Actually,
Is it clear, the voice?
It's good now, yes.
Yeah, okay, great, okay.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be part of this event. So again, my name is Surah Sabah from Kuwait, and today we'll be talking about something that touches our daily life, and I think and hope that it will interest you. My topic is the importance of digital technology on the growth of multi-use house. And we'll start today with three following main parts. We'll introduce the nature of the study, then we'll move to the multi-use house terminology and the stages, and also a brief of historical background in Kuwait, and we'll review some case studies in Kuwait, as well as the typology of multi-use house. Then we'll end up with a discussion today with the relationship between the growth of multi-use house and technology. In general, the nature of the topic, it's kind of, I can say it's like changeable. It's easy to, it's difficult to just stop on a certain time. It's changing with the time. So we started on 2015 as a pilot study. Then we moved to 2017 when I published the paper with ISTA. Then 2019, it was part of my thesis. And I think Dr. Mohammed just said with us, he's my advisor, and my co-advisor is Dr. Lamis Bahbahani. And for now, we are focusing on the importance of digital technology on the growth of multi-use house. So you can see the sequence of moving from the beginning as a pilot study up to 2021 for now. And we're doing one more research as a group researcher. So we'll start with the term of multi-use house. So combining non-residential activities with the living space is a practice that has existed in every culture, past and present. However, it's generally remained as a typologically nameless and largely distracted by architectural and academic research. In the contents of Kuwait and this paper, we call it adaptable multi-use house living space, will be referred as a multi-use house as a term. The multi-use house is, have been moved into different stages in Kuwait. We're focusing now in Kuwait, where in pre-oil era, it was really exist. And with the discovery of oil, kind of disappeared and neglected for a time. So there's a big shift before the pre-oil era and the oil discovery. Then in 2015, we witnessing a revival of multi-use house. And from here, we began to investigate the reason behind this revival. And our next research is what's next, what's the future of the multi-use house. So our hypothesis is there's a new evolving form of the multi-use house typology supported by digital tools and global trends. The aims and objective of the paper is to explore the underlying reason behind the revival of multi-use house in Kuwait and shed the light on the importance of the multi-use house typology. We aim to offer insight into how current trends in technology are driving the multi-use house revival and focus on the impact of digital technology on the professionalization of multi-use house in Kuwait. We want to get a clearer understanding of how global trends are driving this traditionally local typology and what our roles as a designers and architects to play in its realization. The research question we start in the beginning of the previous studies, what are the underpinning reason behind the revival of the multi-use house in Kuwait in recent years? And for now, having the technology and combining the technology and multi-use house, our question is, what does this mean for the historical sense communal local that the multi-use house once provided? And how does that affect the role of architects and designers play in shaping in this evolving typology? We're going into a historical background in Kuwait, starting with the pre-oil era, when you can see the houses, it's kind of, you can see multiple of courtyard. It's like there's a harmony in our old Kuwaiti houses. Usually they do, by nature, they do the practice of non-residential activities within house, where you can see women, they work inside the house, then they sell all their goods on the neighborhood. There's a, it's kind of, there's a relationship between the house and the neighborhood before the discovery of oil. Within time, and also here in the pre-oil era, you can see the lifestyle. It's like a diversity of lifestyle, and the nature of people are very connected to each other based on the design of the houses and the neighborhoods as well. So the multi-use house was exist in pre-oil era time. Then in the early post-era in Kuwait City, it's changed from a simple traditional town to a modern urban center at a speed almost unexpected. So this fast of shift create a random citizen distribution and raising up the gap on wealth, and the old skills is no longer needed when we witnessing in the pre-oil era houses. Then we can see a huge shift in the houses in Kuwait from the mud houses to modern houses. And it's like something, a big shift. And with this changes, the multi-use house disappeared totally. There's only one element remained, which is, we call it Dukkan al-Farij. It's like a small market. Basically, it's a garage in the house, and it was legally converted to any activities within the neighborhood. Within time also, it's get forbidden to use it, and it closed totally. So the neighborhood in Kuwait become very quiet. There's no interaction between the neighbors. It's just house, and there's no any interaction between people and the neighbors. Then with the technology and in the current time, we witness that there is a lot of activities inside the houses. And by having the technology and having some platform in Instagram, a lot of people started to raise their voices to ask for legalize this type of practicing their businesses within the house. As you can see in this picture, they call it, it's a group of Legalize Kuwait. They aim to, and they ask the government to legalize home businesses. Without having this platform in Instagram, they cannot get this group. So they started, and now it's legalized to have a home business at home. And here also we have another people who moved and asked for having home businesses to be legalized at home, also using the technology and using the Instagram platform to introduce their ideas. We were talking about Kuwait, but also during the research, we're asking ourselves, is it only in Kuwait or it is also international? So we've moved to get small samples from other countries to combine and see the links for future studies. So one of the few questions is it the culture in what culture does this practice exist? Is it only in Kuwait or other countries? And are there any international and Kuwait examples that offer similarities or commonly shared experience that arise using multi-use house typology? We kept the questions and we'll go over the answers with the research. So we followed yeah, it's a qualitative research methodology. We have a pilot study, online survey. We have a few samples of Kuwaiti examples, women working at home, and we have some interview and field survey as well. From the pilot study, we found that there's a lot of activities operated from houses that we're really surprised about it. There's a food businesses, there's a sport training, there's a graphic design services, children party planning, furniture design, everything is behind those houses that we don't know. It might be your neighbor and you don't know at that time. And now it's kind of, they share what they do inside their houses. So based on the pilot study, we moved and we asked for a few people to know about their activities inside their houses. So we have 5 case study, NK, RO, FD, LR, and SQ. The first is the Children Training Center. The second is a fitness center. The third is a women tailoring. The fourth is Life Training Center and interior designer practice. So going for NK, she's an architect and she also operates her businesses in a house in a residential area, and she got a lot of benefits and disadvantages as well. We'll go over it. If you can see the space, it's also she can create whatever she wants. She have a free time, and also she have the space to rechange it. Depends on the activities that she want to do. And here's some example of people working inside house. From their neighbors, they come and visit her and they do the activities inside the house. We have the other example, which is, RO, she do a Zumba classes, exercises inside her house in the basement. And she do it since 2014. And here's just a sample of the plan. And here it looks, if anybody saw this picture, they thought it's like an official fitness center, but it's only a basement in a neighborhood house. Then we have the FD example. She have a tailor in her basement as well in residential area, which attract all the neighbors to come for her and do have this kind of services. And here's some examples about her place. It's a small place, but all the neighbors are really interested to go inside their houses. We have also LR. She has a life training center. Also, she do some practices inside her house. Most of the neighbors, they come and visit her. Some of them just come to drink a coffee and have a conversation and they move on. So you can see having those services and the doors opens create bringing back the spirit of the old neighborhood for our current time. We were talking about is it unique, having the multi-use house, or it's also in other countries? We had a small study with Frances Hollis, where she have her own study, and we compare what she mentioned with our case study. So you can see those lines, it's the similarities. So for our next research, we're going to make kind of comparing our case studies with her case studies and see the similarities. And we might come up with a universal concept. Here's after having the 5 cases, 5 case studies findings, we witnessing a lot of economic benefits and a lot of urban benefits, and we'll go over it for now. Here is some example of the economic benefits and the urban benefits. Most of the things that we are focusing on this study is the diversity neighborhood activities. So it become more lively neighborhood, having even one multi-use house with the neighbor. So this is one of the things we are really, we want to keep it even if we're having the technology. Then the typology, after having those 5 case studies, we're trying to create categories for the multi-use house. So we are trying to see the relation between the clients and the services. So we have some clients are going to the house, and some clients, the services come to their houses. So it depends on the services and the nature of the businesses inside the house. Then we came up with the 3 type of multi-use house, which is A, B, and C. And we think that there's something coming soon, which is the new evolving form of multi-use house, which is kind of related to technology. Now, the multi-use house solution become more appealing. So we're coming back to the question again. What does this mean for the historical sense of communal local that the multi-use house was once provided? And how does that affect the role of architects, designers play in shaping this evolving typology? Here we have one example also. She's a graphic designer, and she said, without technology, I wouldn't be able to do what I do today. Continuing my master's degree as well as working is really time consuming. That's having the technology tools help me to manage my small businesses smoothly at home. So a lot of people having this advantage of technology and starting their businesses from home, then they go to the market. So this is, we can say, it's like helping a lot of people to start as a startup. To conclude, the multi-use house in general offers a multitude benefits in different aspects of society in a social level to bring back the diversity that once exists in a pre-oil era neighborhood. This brings back the sense of collective well-being over personal benefit within society. The flexibility in its use offer more than just a commercial opportunity. It is a means to practice one passion, develop skill, be creative for women, especially to support their families. Economically, the multi-use house broaden the participants of youth and on the community and encourage individuals to be more productive, not just idle consumers. On an urban level, the multi-use house enriches the neighborhood and solves many urban issues. The findings suggest that there is a reassurance in multi-use house usage, but unlike in a pre-oil time era, it's a new evolving form of typology supported by digital tools and the global trends. By looking on the history of home-operated businesses in Kuwait, including the prevalence before and decline during the oil economy, this study offers insight into how current trends in technology are driving revival. As a policymaker are faced with the increasing demand to normalize the multi-use house practices, architects, planners, and designers can offer a valuable perspectives that inform future research. In general, what we are going is we aim to strike the balance between rapid changes in technology and traditionally multi-use house typology. And our hypothesis is that we are witnessing that there's a new evolving form of multi-use house typology supported by digital tools and global trend. Thank you. Shukran in Arabic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Surah. That's excellent. And thank you to all of our speakers today for sticking to time, because that now has left us with with 20 minutes for any questions, which is great considering we had 5 papers. So I would encourage anybody who is in the audience to raise your hand or speak up if you would like to ask a question. So we have one already, and that is from Yusuf. Is that correct?
Hi, yes, it is correct.
Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, fantastic presentations from everyone. I'm personally very interested in Dr. Jihan's work because I've been following this project closely and I'm very passionate about it. And I really seeing the locals and how they interacted with the project was very valuable. But I want to ask a question on the theoretical side of things, because you have mentioned the term collective remembrance rather than collective memory. And I like that because it highlights the contested nature of history. So in the qualitative approach to the space, did you find any kind of conflicted narratives on the space's meanings or memories or stories that happened there? And how did you portray that in the project's dissemination and findings?
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Yusuf, for the question. So just to first highlight that Qais in Jordan is not a contested space. So that will let us understand collective memory and collective remembrance in a different way. So normally, if we're looking at a conflict place, there's also grievances and trauma of events that will always be occurring in the stories and the narratives. So despite Qais is not a conflict area, but they still have that kind of traumatic and grievance of the relocation that happened in the 1980s. So this always came up into the stories. So at some point you have the individual stories of the people looking at their living spaces. And I think the issue for them is that they can still see the physical constructs of those spaces still available and still live in Qais, but they're also in full destruction because of the deterioration, because of the environmental issues and the neglect. So this is one side of on the individual memory, but coming back again on the collective one, and I think probably you were part of this, hearing some stories from the people when you went there, is the place itself, it's the traditions that are deteriorating and vanishing, it's even coming into the type of food that tourists will come to eat. It's even present in the kind of the small hostel of Baraka that is happening, that's on the site there, that is trying to keep that tradition live and up. So, and even coming back when we were deciding on the name of the project, when we were applying to the HRC, and there came the idea of a living museum. So we're talking about a memory that is still live. It's not in the past anymore. We want that memory to keep life. We want it to keep on going. And moreover, we want the young people in Qais who did not live the relocation and the displacement events to know about it and to keep the memory of the place on and going. And hence coming the idea of recording and digitizing, because this is where they start to engage with those stories and engage with those memories. So that's where we try to bring the heritage, the tradition, and using the digital technologies to support our aims and objectives, to support our plans to keep that memory alive and recorded, but it's not about the digital tools itself. So this is where we try to bring the individual and the collective memory and remembrance together.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Does anybody else have any questions? We have, is it Mice? Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thanks all for the wonderful presentations. I have a question to Dr. Jihan, since Yusuf, I think his name, just asked a question about the project. And yeah, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. And as a Jordanian, though living in Germany, I'm proud to see such a great work documenting the cultural and historical heritage of Jordan. I would like to ask you about the unique use of the term co-production, which refers to the co-construction of virtual space together with the local or former inhabitants of Qais. So I'd like to know if there are initiatives from your side to reconstruct these places in reality, or if it's just merely like a virtual project rather. And would you still use it as a co-production since it's coined by Lefebvre and it refers to the actual space? You think it's not exclusive for the physical space? So this is one question. The other question I'd like to know from your side, what challenges you have encountered collecting memories of these places, whether the reconstruction of these memories has been influenced by personal perception or individual experiences. And I think Yusuf asked about this more or less, and whether it's more spatial memories, the way you constructed it in virtually. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maiz, for the question. And I'm happy to know that you're from Jordan, so we will have common language of what we're trying to do. So honestly, on the first hand, we're trying to do everything, but at the time that we have to be very realistic about what could be achieved within a very specific duration of time, and to stick to the the scope of the project and what we aimed and what we asked to do, and hence we got the funding for that. So how did it start? We started with a project or a proposal that we want to record and document the physical heritage and the intangible heritage as well of the community of Qais. What does that entail? It entails a lot of things. And trying to cope with both of them, it was very, very challenging. So sometimes our ambitions are really up and high in the sky, but we try to reach what we try to do. So your first question about co-production. Co-production entails the physical and the non-physical as well. So what we try to do is not to implement co-production in the physical heritage on its own, but the co-production was through the engagement of the youth community of Qais, and that actually became our target when the project started. We started to look and identifying who are our stakeholders, and it was the collective decision, not from me only, but we do have amazing partners in Jordan. And I'm talking about the Department of Antiquities. We have academics and non-academics from the nearby Jordan University of Science and Technology who have been extensively researching and working on the site of Qais. So it was the full idea of who our beneficial stakeholders, and we identified that the youth people would be the most appropriate beneficiaries in the site. And this is how we worked. So we worked with two groups of volunteers in Qais for the co-production. So the aim of the co-production was to let them know about the history, to know about the spaces, to know about the places. The majority of them no longer live in Qais, and some of them, when talking to them, they don't know much about the history of it. And I can understand, because time is running and we're talking about an incident or an event of displacement that happened 30 or 40 years ago. So some of them were not just even born yet. So they only hear the stories from their parents, their moms and dads and their siblings and so on. So the co-production aspect was a way of re-engaging them to come back to the site and give them capacity and give them workshops to train them of how can you record the memories, how can you grasp the stories from the original people who lived in the place. So that was one side of that, and that's what we called our volunteering group. So we were amazed to have 25 young people volunteering to come and work with us on the co-production of the digital storytelling, of mapping and recording some of the artifacts on the site, creating photogrammetry 360 visual tours and so on. So, and we've got a lot of testimonies about how they engaged in that in terms of training wise. The other element of co-production that worked more on an academic level. So we had 65 students from Jordan University of Science and Technology, where we went to the School of Visual Arts and Architecture, and we run 3 long semester modules that are only about co-production in Qais. And this is where we created our branding artifacts, we created our digital storytelling, we created our children trail maps for the site, and more and more. So these are the 2 sides of things. So it's not about conserving the architecture or the physical spaces about it, but it's about recovering the memory of the site through many, many co-production multimedia ways. I hope that answered the first side of the question. The second part was what the challenges we faced. Is that, am I correct? In which aspect exactly? Because there were many, many challenges.
Yeah, I asked about the challenges you faced in collecting these memories, whether they are memories influenced by their personal perception or individual experiences, or whether they're spatial memories of the space, physical memories.
Well, I will come back to the idea of that. Our partners were really very helpful and supportive in identifying the right stakeholders who will help support recording the right memory. And this is where we identified 13 members of the community who have actually lived in Qais and who actually lived in that place. So, and I'm talking about the well-known families of Arusan, Malakawi, and many, many more. And as you know, probably know that already 5 of the houses have been renovated and used now, reused now for other purposes, like the coffee shop, like the treaty house. They're doing the conservation for the treaty house at the moment. So to be honest, we haven't faced any major challenges of grasping the stories and grasping the memories of that, because I would just say that our community that we work with were very helpful, very collaborative. And this is how we try to thank them one again in the exhibition we had 2 weeks ago, is that we had those stories told through their portraits and their faces visible to everyone, just to know that those are the original people who lived in the space. So we didn't have any major issues of recording those stories or for them to tell us. Actually, they were so open and very transparent and very welcoming to our presence in the site.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have another hand raised from Mohammed. Hopefully Mohammed's going to bring in one of our other speakers at this stage. Mohammed?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I have a quick question for Cecilia with regard to the archaeological discoveries, and it seems that they become the center of political debate, and it's not just about the history, but it's about the current situations and how it's polarized. And I ask because we do have some similarities here in Kuwait, but what is the perception that would be projected to the public? How do the public see it? I mean, it's located in Hong Kong, these archaeological sites, and they are they do have a certain narrative, but then is there a way where it becomes presented to the public where both narratives are presented, or is there like especially through social media? I mean, I'm just curious about it to see if there's any parallels.
Sure.
I don't know if it makes sense, the question.
Yes, I absolutely. I think that the point that I'm trying to drive across is that there are actually multiple publics, right? There are these different groups that in their own way, they portray and interpret these, the same materials in different ways. So there is an initial news articles, there are initial documentation by the archaeologists. The archaeologists themselves also represent a certain public as experts, that they actually are less interested in the artifacts themselves, because they are saying that there are certain ways that these things should mean and how people should respond to them. And obviously that is being contested. And so you have the activists who wanted to use these artifacts to enhance the local identity. You have the pro-Beijing politicians and legislators who use these artifacts to articulate what it means of Hong Kong's pre-linkage with China. But actually, you know, I'll try to reconstruct these presentations to present in a slightly different conference before. I was a little less, getting tired of the politics a little bit myself, because of course, every, authenticity is actually not really the questions about these things, but it is about the contested meanings and what people did with them. But of course, the politics is everywhere. Having every heritage site, a lot of heritage sites, maybe not every everyone. But I'm interested in why these particular artifacts, unearthed relics, that they had this sort of power to generate a new sense of historicity. In what ways do people engage with them so that they become emotional? Which is, there is a certain power that inherent in these materials themselves, and also through a certain kinds of representations, through certain kind of reconstruction of what they are, that makes people feel that they can develop a new relationship with them. So I think that is actually concern us more, because that really drives what we do with these things and how we actually make the world in a way, rather than only about debating about the politics around it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, I mean, it's clear, and it brings the other point, or that there is always this revisions of who wrote that narrative. I mean, we're not talking about the Hong Kong specifically, but even in the future, or even in the past, when we study, when we study archaeological sites and architecture, it's like, who wrote it? And it becomes very interesting, because there is a validity to the narrative, and you think that archaeological sites are very scientific in their discoveries, but then all of a sudden the politics come in, and we've had buildings that were changed names because of politics.
Yeah, for sure. I actually, you bring up the question that actually might be applicable to the other speakers. We talked about, I like the word that earlier raised about new collective memories versus collective remembrances, because that implies there is something that is already existed and extracted from the past. But I'm interested also to hear more about the creations of new memories using some of these artifacts. As I think that some of the speakers talked about, these people didn't live in these places before, so it is not really their own direct memories, right? That you're actually trying to create new memories and meanings and new relationships through particular kind of representations that can become powerful and be very effective. I'm not sure that's, the other speakers want to respond to that about the new.
Yeah, so if any of our other speakers would like to respond to that, but just before we finish as well, I just want to ask an obvious question as well, which is, to what extent has the global pandemic influenced so much of this work and these fields, and COVID itself? So for example, Andrea, I can imagine that Second Life had a bit of a boost with people being stuck at home. And Shura, my house has certainly become a multi-use home during the global pandemic, a place where I live, work, and carry out activities and so on and so forth. So before we finish, I felt it would be necessary to ask if anybody had any reflections on the extent to which the global pandemic has advanced discussions around the use of these digital tools. One at a time.
Yes, there was an interesting question from Stuart. I don't know if there is time to answer him, but it's very interesting the aspect of authenticity in digital, because we're not talking about material, so we don't have an age of our buildings, and the buildings will never get old. But this is why it's important to bring time and history into this virtual world, especially because there is no chance to identify, and I'm talking about the hierarchy that is talking, identify spaces and get lost. So this is why most of the time these virtual worlds are made of grids like New York, and to help the people with the spatial awareness. But at the same time, I think that it's because there is no authenticity. Architects have an important role there. They should really embrace these challenges and give answers. Otherwise, we will have a very boring digital future, let's say, in this digital environment.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm just aware that we've reached 2 p.m., which is the official cutoff time. So if people need to move on to another session, that's fine. But I'm happy to to stay for another 5 minutes or so if any of the other speakers would like to come back on any of the questions that have been asked. I see Surah is nodding enthusiastically. So Surah, you're muted. You need to unmute.
Hello?
Yep, that's fine. That works.
Okay. Hello. There's a question, or you want me just to mention what happened during the pandemic and multi-use house? Personally.
Yes.
Okay, I'll share it with you. So my house converted naturally as a multi-use house, and using the internet, I have I started to write stories for kids about architecture. I didn't saw the company, the people who's publishing my story until now. I didn't saw them. It's only between communication WhatsApp, and we're doing a really good job. So it's really something I couldn't just imagine that I will do such work just at home in a small space, isolated, and do something out of. I thought I have to go for them and discuss a lot of things. So for 1 year, I'm just discussing with them about my story, and we write a story and we'll publish it after tomorrow. So it's like just sticking at home, creating your space, renovate your spaces, and convert it from living room to an office that you can host them online, and you do something it's not you used to it before. So I experienced the multi-use house during the pandemic. And I think I have a new vision for the new research with Dr. Mohammed Jassar, sure. Okay. So that's it, just to share the
Yes, that's
personal.
absolutely fine. So does anybody else want to come in there? Well, I need to leave within the next 3 minutes. So, but I want to give anybody an opportunity. But before I do, can I just thank everybody for your papers, thank everybody for the questions, and congratulate our conference organizers and all the team for managing to put this conference together despite the difficulties faced. So Mais, I see your hand raised.
Yeah. I have a question to Sarah, and thank you for the very interesting presentation. One of your questions was about like whether this typology of multi-use houses exists in other societies or countries, and I would like to ask you the uses you just presented, especially the uses that are created by women groups. Would you connect this to that this is like unconstructed space of women, for example, and that as a replacement for going to other places? And would you consequently reflect on right to the city and right to access to public life, especially in some conservative societies? And so would this be one of your conclusions, or it's not related? And the other thing I think you explained, so what kind of other emerging typologies you notice due to the
I can't
global
hear.
pandemic? Sorry?
I can't hear. 1 second.
Okay.
We can chat on the others. You can find me on the Instagram. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
But you know, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, listen, and I think I'm going to have to somehow bring this to a close. So once again, thanks to everybody for your papers and your responses. And I'm sure if people have other questions, they will be in touch. But in the meantime, I wish you all a nice afternoon, and hopefully I will meet you all in the real world someday.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
All the
all.
best,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Chris.
you.
No worries, Andrea. See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.